Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we have reached the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitle Talkin Liberty. It is when we reintroduce our regular contributor, that's number one. Number two, constitutional lawyer. Number three, LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor. And the big finish, number four, our guardian of individual liberty, Scott Cosenza, sitting there with a Cheshire Cat grin.
That the last one is my favorite, Tim. I thank you for it, and I'm glad to be here.
I get the sense you would relinquish the first three if you were allowed to keep the fourth one.
Easy trade.
Easy trade. Okay. I approached this subject with great delicacy because of your personal feelings about our Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, the lovely lady, who has now put in force new Title IX rules, the kind of thing we've been talking about for years right here on Talkin Liberty, Scott.
Tim, our 11th Secretary of Education, delivered the great news that the Title IX guidance is actually now going to be converted from a guidance into a rule, which has a greater force of law. So that's change number one. And that force of law will include due process protections for the accused, Tim. It is a sea change in higher education coming, whereby victims of false allegations of sexual abuse will now have some method of defending themselves besides basically writing a very large check to a lawyer to go to court to fight those kangaroo courts that we see in the universities.
Seems like the Me Too movement was a little bit shorter than most people anticipated, Scott.
You know, it's shocking that people like one of the things I think it's important, you know, as a libertarian, Tim, to talk about is that the preconceived notions of people are often wrong in various ways. Like the notion that Democrats like Barack Obama and his administration would be for the rights of the accused, for instance, are not accurate. When we talk about progressives, it's all about the political ideology that it advances. And in this case, it's seen as sort of basically like white frat boys are the ones who are receiving the injustice. And so it wasn't important, Tim, to right that wrong. But the truth is that all sorts of people face the injustice of the kangaroo court system that the Obama administration kind of fostered in our universities. And it's high time that we lay it to rest.
California. A federal judge allowing that state's stay-at-home orders to stand.
You know, we're seeing, Tim, across the country, various challenges to various types of orders and in various courts, meaning federal courts and state courts. We can talk about two cases today. This is a case in the federal courts where a church said that the order that required them not to basically hold services violated their First Amendment right to freedom of religion, free speech, and others. And the federal courts in this instance said that the power that was exercised to combat the emergency health crisis of COVID-19 is consistent with the Constitution. It's somewhat surprising to me that is true for this judge, but it's important to kind of, I think at this point, we don't have one case that's like a big case. So we're just sort of surveying the landscape. And this is the trend right now that I'm seeing in the cases that are reported. There's a case out of Illinois as well, where a judge ruled similarly that a church could not open, and that refusal was also consistent with their constitutional rights because of the emergency. So we're going to have to see if the appellate courts, which you'll surely hear these cases coming up, will agree to that language and that reasoning.
Okay, we've taken the listeners from Washington and Betsy DeVos all the way to the West Coast in California. Let's head back east to our state, the Commonwealth of Virginia, where the Virginia Citizens Defense League is back in court over gun range closures, which were the idea of the man who is now considered the most anti-gun governor in the country, Ralph Northam.
So this type of challenge, Tim, is in a state court, differentiating from the federal court. We all have various rights that we share as Americans under the federal Constitution, and then individual rights that are granted by our various state constitutions. In some cases, they may be identical. In Some there's a little bit of a difference. We may have increased rights to certain things under various state constitutions. So anyway, this was a state court case. In fact, the governor tried to remove it to federal court, and the VCDL and Gun Owners of America were able to challenge that and have it sent back to state court. And the state court, Tim, ruled that this gun range could remain open, but they terminated the order enjoining the governor. So basically, the gun range goes to court and says, we don't want to be on lockdown because of the various rights that we can establish. The court agrees and says, you're not subject to this order. They say to the governor, you're not allowed to enforce your lockdown order against this range. But that judge's order, Tim, expires on the day that the order they were fighting expired. Okay. Now here's where it gets tricky. The governor signs an extension to that order. Well, they have to go back to court now every time there's going to be an extension. So you can imagine the sort of frustrating the liberty of the people just through that process alone. So that's just why I thought it was important to mention, and also to kind of demonstrate the challenge of litigating against these shutdown orders throughout the country.
Well, you've talked about what they're doing in California, where a federal judge has allowed that state stay-at-home orders. In Virginia, gun range is an issue during this. And then there's Texas, which is sort of the Republicans' answer to California. It's the biggest red state in the country. And in Texas, they'll no longer be sending people to jail for violating strict social distancing.
The Governor Greg Abbott, in a burst of common sense, Tim, and
is that what it's called?
Appreciating the civil rights of his citizens. They had a couple of high-profile instances this week, including a hair salon, I think, and a bar owner with basically guns being drawn for people that were just living their lives, not harming anyone, but just disobeying the social distancing kind of order. So I think it's a great thing that the governor has stepped in and not, 6 months from now in terms of like voiding convictions, but said right up front, right away, we're not going to arrest people. I mean, just the absurdity, obviously, of taking someone who's outside, for instance, into a lockdown situation where we know that the COVID is more rampant. It just doesn't make any sense that they would do that.
All right, Scott, back to California, which has sued both Uber and Lyft, claiming that they misclassified drivers as independent contractors.
It's hard to imagine something more crushing to the gig economy workers, right, than in the midst of this coronavirus crisis. Like, let's encourage Uber and Lyft to fire all these people. This has to do with an attempt by California in order to get those people classified as employees. And the reason why is because California will then reap a whirlwind tax benefit if they do so. And the companies, of course, don't want the headache of having to deal with those people as employees, and have structured their business arrangements precisely to avoid having to classify those people they engage with as employees. California passed a law that, and Uber and Lyft have both said, no matter what the law says, we're not employing these people. The people who call the car are the ones who are doing the employing. We're the platform. And so we're now going to have to see that case played out in court, and we'll see if California wins and the destruction of the gig economy in California is accomplished, or if Uber wins and Lyft wins, and they can go on, providing rides for reasonable prices.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose with our own proper Brit, Mark Angelides. All of them available on demand at LibertyNation.com, and of course from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And for heaven's sake, stay healthy. We'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.